think to talk about divine order. And I want you to be thinking about, how do you know the question I'm asking? On this bright, cheery Sunday morning, if I ask you, where were you? How do you know? I just said, where were you? Like, how do you know what I'm talking about? Yep. I was in the newspaper office at the University of Utah. Of course, sorry, 9/11. Isn't it something that we can distill it, summarize it down to 9/11, coincidentally 9/11, interesting. And so I want to talk about divine order and chaos. Because when we affirm divine order, I also think that we need to realistically recognize and understand the role of chaos. Because when we talk about divine order, we are talking about nothing less than what is called the problem of theodicy. And theodicy is this question of, why is there suffering? Why do so-called bad things happen? And I think, and I imagine you would agree, that for us to name tragedy as anything other than tragedy is to do a deep disservice. And I got a call from a fellow chaplain a few weeks ago, and she had just dealt with a case where a child burned to death through an accident. Like, he triggered this accident himself. And she called me up and she said, "Jared, do you think we agreed to what happened to us? Do you think we chose what happened to us in this life?" Great question, right? And my answer was, not exactly, and not specifically. Because it's called systematic theology when you pick up the whole picture and you look at the whole thing. And this is what I want to do when I talk about divine order. Because one insight that I've had around grief and acceptance is very often we get really, really focused on small, particular points of the picture. And when we're thinking about divine order, it's very important to look at the whole picture, look at the big picture. My answer to my friend was that I do believe that we as divine beings, that we as particular points of the divine, understood what we were doing when we chose to be incarnated on this earthly experience, right? Like, whatever the particulars and specifics are in your own theology, of how exactly that works, I don't know. But to me, it makes a lot of sense that I can see how we as souls, or we as parts of the universe, would be excited about the opportunity to lament the chaos. Because that's the paradox of divine order. I want to find the specific quote, but one of my favorite ideas I've ever come across is this basic idea where it said, do not lament the death, do not lament the war, do not lament the tragedy, do not lament the disasters. Marvel that we have the opportunity to do so. Don't I mean, sure, we can grieve all of these things. But in this cosmic sense, in this big picture, it is so marvelous that we even have the opportunity to lament the tragedy and the grief. And as we're talking about divine order, so my insight about grief and bereavement, which in a word is acceptance. That is the entire work of grief. The entire work of grief is acceptance. It is updating to what is. And I want to invite all of us to think about what we mean when we talk about divine order. And I haven't looked enough into the worldview of the Fillmores. I know it broadly, but one of my favorite things about Charles and Myrtle Fillmore is how enthusiastically they embraced new knowledge. I mean, their entire lives, they were studying world religions. They were integrating the very best understanding of science into their worldview. And when we think of divine order, in divinity school, literally on Friday, we were talking about the ancient world, the medieval world, the Renaissance world, the enlightened world, the modern world, the postmodern world, the postmodern world, which needs a different name, for crying out loud. We've had this whole flow of understanding. And we're going to talk about physics for just a moment, because in the ancient world, and this has carried through the Enlightenment, we've all heard of Plato, right? Like Plato and, Socrates' teacher, and Aristotle, his student, who invented literally like everything that ends in osophy and ology, like really impressive guy. I think that too often we fall into the error thinking of perfectionism, which is a bit ironic, right? Because we're talking about divine order, and you would think, and I will admit that this is roughly what the Fillmores taught, is that there's some Platonic divine realm, right? Where everything is already perfect, and everything is perfectly ordered, and our life is a bloody mess, and all we need to do is work and struggle and align our mess with divine order. Am I wrong? I mean, I'm being provocative, but like more or less, right? This idea that there is divine order. And in a sense, there is truth to that. I personally agree with the unity principle that there is divine order and that it is error thinking that is at the root of all evil, right? I mean, there's our collective consciousness. And when we, with terrorism and tragedy and accident and abuse, which we need to take seriously, I genuinely believe that all of that does come from human error. It comes from human thinking. And this is one of the first cards that people play when they're responding to this question of theodicy. Why is there suffering? Well, it's your own damn fault. If you were not such a messed up human, you would not suffer. Again, we need to be really, really careful when we talk about these things. And we do need to take seriously the fact that we have all inherited error thinking. We live in a broken world. Let's talk about 9/11 for just a moment. Because when we talk about 9/11, we highlight the 2,977 people who were killed. And I read a reaction yesterday that said, please don't call these people American heroes. They didn't want to be heroes. They just wanted to go to work. They wanted to fly in an airplane. They wanted to do their job. Yes, first responders military personnel, we can call them heroes, and people acted heroically on that day. But we need to be really, really careful about our stories. And when we remember, we say we will never forget those 3,000 people who died on 9/11. And it was the largest attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor. And as a hospice chaplain, one of the most amazing experiences that I have is I get to talk to people who remember Pearl Harbor the way that we remember 9/11. Like, it's an amazing thing to be able to talk to people of that generation. I have met over a dozen World War II veterans. There was a 102-year-old man who finally, it was his time to transition. And when we momentarily think about 9/11 and we remember that, too often we don't think about the 900,000 Afghani and Iraqi citizens, the humanitarian workers, and all of the people who have died since on the world. And we experience the big picture. So one of my don't let it go. Don't let it go. And I think that's what we do with the affirmed divine order. We don't need to ignore or reject, I have an idea, the fact that there is tragedy and chaos, but I want to look at the whole picture. This is very. I am just going to hold it. And we're not, even when we talk about loss of life, that's only part of the picture. So lots of drone strikes, and I'm gonna bring this around to divine order really, really quick. Just bear with me for 1 second. So there are Predator drones. Any guesses as to how much one costs? It's $40 million. And they fire missiles that cost $100,000. This is the world we live in. We live in a world where a soldier who's paid $30,000 a year fires a missile that costs $100,000 toward a village that will never make $100,000. Why does all of this matter? Because we have to take it seriously. And the main message that I want you to remember is to take seriously this chaos and this struggle and spend it. Now to physics and chemistry, away from political science. My undergraduate was in Middle Eastern studies. Have you ever wondered where life comes from? This is not going to be that talk. But the second law of thermodynamics, so the first law of thermodynamics is that energy cannot be created or destroyed. The second law of thermodynamics is that closed systems gravitate toward entropy. Chaos increases. How can we affirm divine order when we live in a universe where chaos is always increasing? A physicist will tell you that the fate of the universe is the Great Chill. It goes from like the Big Bang to the Great Chill. And just working from physics, the fate of the universe as we understand it is that everything will drift toward absolute zero. And it will just be very, very cold and very, very quiet. And so in that context, and then there's the greater mystery of like, where did the Big Bang come from and where did life come from? And that's amazing. But here is the great secret of life is not a closed system. And the way that a plant or a human being or a community increases the order is it draws on the chaos of the wider system. And I believe that if the Fillmores were here, I wonder whether they would teach divine order in that way, because that is taking into account our very best understanding of physics, the way that life works, the way that biology works. Here is why I'm talking about all of this. So it is in our lives. I think that we can often get discouraged when we see all of the chaos in our lives and we say, where is the divine order? How can I affirm divine order? And the great secret is the chaos is the order. And this is why I've titled my remarks, God Ordered a Broken Universe. And I don't just mean that divine order and God increases the order within a chaotic universe, which I do believe, we are evidence of that, but that what is necessary to divine order is chaos. I wrote a poem years ago called Tikun Haolam. And Tikun Haolam is this beautiful Jewish idea that means to repair the world, to heal the world, to repair the world. And it says, God to the universe, be perfect, be loving, be whole, knowing the cost, billions of years, broken lives and broken souls. And so here is the secret. The chaos is the order. The brokenness is the wholeness. And so this is why I say, do not deny the chaos. Do not deny the brokenness. Use it and spend it. As a hospice chaplain, I am a specialist in brokenness. I was so-called, or so it seems. I was talking to my quadriplegic brother yesterday. We were strategizing, fixing the world together. And I asked him whether his quadriplegia was degenerative. Is he less able to operate a manual wheelchair, for example? He's never been in a manual wheelchair. But I'm like, could you condition yourself to a degree that you could operate a manual wheelchair? And he said, well, my condition is not any more degenerative than yours is. And by that, he meant that, as my dad said, life is a terminal diagnosis. And as a hospice chaplain, my job is to help encourage people while their bodies and minds break down into chaos along no particular timeline and no particular order. And yet, I see divine order. I see divine order in the husband taking care of his Alzheimer's wife. And he says, I've been riding her coattails our entire relationship, and now it's my turn to take care of her. I see divine order in his response. And he is the sweetest man. And he said, I don't really know how to do all of this, but I'm just showing up every day. That is divine order. I was called into the hospital at 5:30 this morning. And I heard another story. This is the cutest thing. Of a husband who was sitting in the room with his wife who had just died at 5:30 in the morning. And he said, for the last month, I talked to my wife on the phone until the early hours of the morning. Well, it was his daughter telling the story, but he was there. They were like adorable dating teenagers. Like in the last month of their life, after 40 years together, they would talk on the phone all night together. And he shared that after 40 years, she told him things that she never had. That is divine order. So again, I want to invite all of us, encourage all of us to think about divine order as beautifully ordered and realized chaos. One thing, as a recovering idealist and a recovering perfectionist, one thing that really helps me is to focus on the right target. And I think the right target is to live with proper form and to show up with grace. I am going to read a section out of a sermon that I gave in prison. And this was for an LDS audience, speaking in the prison chapel that I'm in charge of. And I began this sermon in prison by telling the inmates that they're pathetic, because I was talking about human nature. And similar to divine order, I wanted to emphasize to them the message and the divine order of grace. The message of grace, because divine order is not in perfectionism, Platonic absence of error, but it's in the dynamic living process of grace. So, however this, Christian framing speaks to you, it's not what I usually use, but it was appropriate for the time. Let's come back to human nature. Yes, that disappointing, even pathetic human nature. I'm gonna unify this a little bit. I'm gonna turn this into unity. How do we apply Christ consciousness in our lives? How do we affirm divine order and become more like Jesus the Christ? Paradoxically, by fully inhabiting it. We practice the lessons we teach to children. We are honest, especially when we make mistakes. We admit when we are wrong. We apologize to those we have hurt. We seek forgiveness, and every day we work to do better. I think too often we think of doing better as learning. I could say we think of affirming divine order as getting it right, getting it better and better, being good enough. Learning isn't enough. We have to practice every day. It literally is a spiritual workout. Living well is hard, scary work. We are constantly tempted to slip and lie and avoid. There's that human nature again, that error thinking, we would say. In our lazy human avoidance, we are strangers to Christ consciousness, because Christ consciousness and divine order is about truth, about love, about freedom, about peace, about growth, and our human natural tendencies won't get us there, that error thinking. Here's the miracle there, though. When you admit you are wrong, you are never more likely to find out what is right. When you admit you are in need, you are never more likely to get help. When you admit you are weak, you are never more likely to affirm your strength. God does not say that we have weakness so that we can make a checklist and totally overcome each weakness one by one, and then, yay, we're perfect on our own, although some people try. But Scripture says we are given weakness. God gives us human limitations. We as divine beings inhabit chaos. We are made of chaos. Why? So that we will be humble. Because when we are humble, we aren't trying to be perfect, though we try to be better. When we are humble, we realize we won't get it right. When we are humble, we are open to learning, apologizing, forgiving. When we are humble, we give and receive grace. As humans, we cannot right our wrongs. We cause damage we cannot correct. Thus, our need for grace. The most we can do in this life is make the most of our mistakes, spend the currency of our consequences, allow our past to break our hearts, make our spirits contrite, and do better, become better. So here's the secret of divine order. The redirection is the direction. The chaos is the material for the order. Don't resist the chaos as you affirm divine order. Name it, use it, spend it, use it to affirm order in yourself, in your lives. And then, as we affirm divine order, this will be the divine order of grace and love, not Platonic cold perfection. Thank you.